You've reached Hotel Pacifico, your 5-star destination for BC politicos. Press 4 for room service. Press the star key for your hosts Mike McDonald and Kate Hammer.
Welcome back, guests. Hello, Geoff.
Good morning, Mike. Man, you're dressed for the day. Look at that.
Yeah, I know.
Special sweater.
Got my Vancouver Whitecaps jersey on today because the Whitecaps had a big win on the weekend, and they've got a big game this Friday. And it's just a very small coincidence that TELUS is on the jersey here. So, as a podcast sponsor, we like those happy coincidences here.
Yeah,
I'm not afraid to say it.
TELUS positive today.
TELUS positive today. We're also recording our episode today before the polls have closed in the United States. So we will not have any breaking news declaring the next president of the United States. It may be declared sooner than it took to declare the next premier of British Columbia in this case here.
Is that over yet?
We'll see. I'm not sure it is over yet. We're going to talk about that today.
Keep finding ballots, yeah.
We're going to talk about that today with our guest, Aisha Estey, president of the Conservative Party of British Columbia, and in her day job, a trial lawyer as well. And we're looking forward to hearing more from Aisha. Aisha, welcome to Hotel Pacifico.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, thanks for making time. And, our listeners are curious to know, who are these conservatives? They've come out of
nowhere.
They've come out of the hinterland.
And are everywhere.
Yeah.
They overran the towns and villages and burgs of our great province. But first of all, congratulations on your party's success. How long have you been the president of the party?
Thank you. I've been the president since last June, so I guess we're coming up on a year and a half here. So
just as the plane was coming off the tarmac, taking off.
Oh yeah. It's felt like we've been building. I mean, we've repeated this multiple times throughout the campaign. We're building the plane as we're flying it. Things have grown exponentially fast. But it's been exciting.
How did you find your way onto the plane? Is that something that you, looking back, thought looks inevitable in retrospect, or is it a surprise to you?
So I was originally asked to join the board because one of my good friends was kicked out of the leadership race for the BC Liberals.
You're talking about Aaron Gunn, of course.
Yes, I am. And so by coincidence, Aaron and I went to middle school together. So we met when we were like 13.
Oh, wow.
And I remember meeting this kid and going, what is this 14-year-old doing who's already a member of the Federal Conservative Party?
I'm guessing he was pretty intense in middle school.
Yes, you're guessing correctly.
He wasn't running for student council. He was trying to blow up student council, probably.
He's mellow now? I don't know.
I don't know about that.
Not much has changed. But so he kind of, throughout school, he'd pull our group of friends onto various, we did actually work on a couple campaigns for the BC Liberals. And then I went away to law school, and I feel like you kind of naturally build more of an interest in politics because you kind of learn how society functions. And once I came back, he got kicked out of the BC Liberal leadership race for a tweet. And we were like, okay, what should we do now? Do we appeal the process or do we start a new party? And then we thought, there's this party, pretty small, actually the oldest provincial party, in BC, but hasn't done much in a long time. So maybe there's an opportunity there. So we, went to an AGM, voted in a slate, and I was a director for about the first year. And then I was approached and asked to be president. It wasn't something that I was necessarily looking to do. I'm still fairly early on in my legal career as well, but saw this as kind of a really good opportunity to get some more board experience. And so I said yes, and I kind of I've been trying to say yes to as many opportunities in life as possible. And, obviously my legal background was good for procedure's sake and understanding the Constitution and how all the various, clauses and everything could work together. So I was appointed. Nobody ran against me. So I was appointed president, and then I did not predict that we would be here for sure. But my goal the whole time was just to try to allow the party to function as efficiently as possible. It had, this history of kind of infighting, and it maybe, had a couple false starts, and then things would kind of fall apart. And so that's just been the presiding goal of mine, is to try to, make the board work together to allow growth to be as easy as possible.
But you said something that really fascinated me. As many people who were disappointed in a race like that and thrown out for a tweet would go away frustrated. But you folks said maybe we should start a new party. So you saw an opportunity. What were you looking for in a new organization or in a new approach that you thought would be successful, that more matched your perspectives?
Yeah, so it's crazy because it's not that long ago. But we just felt like there was this huge void in the political landscape. And, the federal party was starting to pick up a little bit then as well, and kind of, speaking to a group of disenfranchised conservative voters who've been, especially in BC, left behind by parties moving too far to the left. And we felt like we had this official opposition that was agreeing with the government at least half of the time. And, we were all young professionals, and we're going, we want to live in this province for the rest of our lives. We want to have the opportunity to have a high paying job. We want the opportunity to be able to buy a house. We want to be able to go to the grocery store and not have to spend $100 every time we walk into it. Just very simple. We live in a province that has the potential, like so much potential to be incredibly prosperous. But it's like this self-flagellation of killing our resource industries, which could be, those resource industries, they bring high paying jobs. And who pays taxes? People who earn a lot of money. So if you can attract more of those high paying jobs, in the oil and gas industry, I think the average salary is like $160,000. If you have more people in this province working in those jobs, they're paying higher taxes, and those taxes pay for the services that we so desperately need. And so from, our perspective, we were young and we saw that this province just had so much potential, and there wasn't a party that was properly fighting for that, at least from our perspective, from what our experience was. I know that obviously, the BC Liberal Party, they were doing that, but they had lost sight of what, at least in our opinion, what conservative voters in BC were looking for.
So I guess the irony from some in the BC Liberals would say is that when Kevin Falcon became leader, he was perceived as a conservative. And what I'm hearing is that you guys didn't see it that way, or at least you didn't have confidence that Kevin would lead it to a place where you were comfortable with.
Yeah, and I think that since 2020 especially, this climate alarmism has just put a damper on any kind of economic development or economic growth. And it doesn't make any sense. So we wanted to, say the quiet things out loud that people were too afraid to say. It was starting to seem like, what's more important, being able to afford to put food on the table, being able to get a good paying job, or, plastic straw or paper straws, or, making it so difficult for people to afford gas to drive to work, or, there's just like a misalignment of priorities. And, on the climate question specifically, I can't quite wrap my head around why we're going to, the world is going to get oil and gas from somewhere. It's not going anywhere. Why are they going to dictatorships, Saudi Arabia, instead of BC, where you have some of the highest environmental standards in the world, and we have human rights? The world should be coming to us to get those resources, because they're going to get them from somewhere. And so we should be championing those resource industries. And, when I travel to some small towns, it really feels like us in Metro Vancouver have really lost appreciation for our resource workers and our resource industries. And we're sacrificing them in the name of virtue signaling about the climate. And it was about time that somebody stood up and said that.
Well,
And
and that's a
yeah,
good segue into what happened next after you became president of the party. If I've got my timeline correct, within a couple months, John Rustad was shown the door from the BC Liberal Party over comments he made about climate. I think that was
yes, it was
later on
just
that summer.
before.
Or was it
It was
just
just
before?
before.
Okay.
So
Or maybe he left. I
yeah,
can't remember exactly what happened. Around the same time.
Hmm.
yeah, because he got kicked out. He got kicked out, and he sat as an independent for a period of time. So
Right.
we started talking to him, and then I think we got him to cross the floor in the March, and then I became president in June.
Okay.
So yeah, so that was the timeline. But yeah, he got kicked out of the BC Liberal Party for retweeting the founder of Greenpeace. So I mean, for something as
However, the founder
Better
of
the
minimal as
Greenpeace
corn.
that,
has
but
had a long journey since then. But can we stop on the
yeah,
tweets? Because this, I mean,
yeah,
Aaron Gunn has a tweet in his past. John Rustad has a tweet in his past. Both turned out to be momentous in ways that the authors never anticipated. And John Rustad, during this campaign, often confronted challenges to candidates, particularly in the second half. He made a point, I thought, early in the campaign of saying that free speech was a core value for him and for conservatives, and that he was reluctant to throw people out or sanction them for exercising their free speech. But this became a big issue, and we see it even today with David Eby saying he has a bright line, I think was his term, that he won't work with conservatives who have hateful views. John Rustad has deplored the views of some of the candidates, like Brent Chapman, that were expressed, or the woman who lost in Juan de Fuca. Can you talk a bit about that border between free speech and hate speech, and how your party sees and understands those questions?
yes. So I look down to the US, or like when I'm thinking about freedom of speech and political parties in particular, I find it really interesting to look at the US because candidates are not controlled by their party necessarily. They're not sending in their tweets to party HQ to get them approved before they do anything. That just doesn't happen. So in a sense, it's much more democratic because, people run in nominations. Almost everyone in the US, is a member of a political party. I'd say that the citizenry is much more engaged politically than Canadians typically are. But they run in nominations, and if a candidate says something that's somebody that people interpret as being incredibly hateful, then maybe they won't win. They won't get elected. It's up to the people to decide that. It's not up to a couple people. It's not up to the leader of the party necessarily. It's not up to a couple people in the war room. So that's, for us, it was definitely a challenge. I mean, because some things came out before the writ drop, some things came out after, and so we were confronted quite head on with, are we going to go down this censorship road, basically, where you fire or cancel people for old tweets that they've made in the past, or do you, at some point, do you leave it up to the electorate to decide if they care enough, if it's disqualifying to them? And in Canada compared to the US, I mean, I think it's probably known that candidates almost never are allowed to tweet or make, any statements themselves without running it through party HQ to get approval first. So in political parties in Canada, communication with candidates is extremely controlled. And I guess we were pushing back on that a little bit, for sure. People have a right to say what their opinion is in this country, and freedom of expression is, in my opinion, when you really get down to it, it's one of the most fundamental rights that differentiates us from Russia or China. There's obviously a lot of things that do, but when it really gets down to it, citizens can't speak up against their government, and when they do, it gets shut down. And in a functioning democracy, you need freedom of expression, freedom of speech. It's absolutely necessary. And that means that people are going to say things that we really don't like and that we really disagree with and that we're offended by. And even if they do that and they're going to do that in our own party.
Yes. Can we talk about clam gardens? You've probably heard of botanical gardens or secret gardens or certainly olive gardens, but have you heard of clam gardens? Let me explain. They are flat stretches of coastal intertidal zones optimized for clams. And they are ecologically and culturally important to many coastal First Nations, including members of the Nawakolis, who have a name for these gardens, Lohiwe. The Nawakolis member nations have preserved coastal environments for generations, utilizing this ancient agricultural technique to enhance marine species productivity. And TELUS is supporting the Nawakolis Council Society, located in Campbell River, to preserve coastal environments through the expansion of Lohiwe in the region. The Nawakolis Council Society is a recent recipient of the TELUS Indigenous Communities Fund, which provides flexible $5,000 to $25,000 grants to Indigenous-led programs supporting Indigenous peoples in Canada across all provinces and territories. As the hometown team deeply rooted in British Columbia, TELUS is proud to support local Indigenous initiatives through the TELUS Indigenous Communities Fund, reinforcing their commitment to reconciliation and community empowerment.
Well, we've talked a bit on this show in past episodes about, at least I have, about the concentration of power in the hands of party leadership, or the entities that flow from party leadership, and how the pendulum has swung, especially when it comes to candidate nominations and the type of issues you're raising, with the whipping of members, and you're articulating a vision that seems to be going back the other direction. But I will raise, though, like during the campaign, there was quite a bit of commentary about, because some conservative candidates not going to all candidates meetings and not being present for that. And, one might think the natural extension of, being free to say what you want is to go out and say it, right? Was there a policy or an approach in the campaign about giving direction to candidates about doing or not doing all candidates meetings, or were you just leaving that up to your individual campaigns?
We would talk to each of the campaigns, and I mean, I think the debates, it's more on a sort of like a personal decision, because some people, live for debates and going in, and but it is it can be very intimidating, and a lot of our candidates were first-time candidates. A lot of our MLAs are first-time MLAs. So this whole process was very new for them. And we wanted them to feel very, confident going into that. And so it was on a one-by-one basis. It was a case-by-case basis that we would, when they were approached, we'd have discussions. If they felt comfortable doing it, then, we'd work with them to prepare them for it, and they'd go do it. And in some cases, people were maybe not so comfortable. So it's a case-by-case basis, but we weren't, people weren't required to send in every single tweet they wanted to make or whatever before they did it. But we tried to work with them because, of course, and I'm not trying to take away the fact that communication in politics, you have to take responsibility for how your message is received. So regardless of what, maybe you had in your mind about what you intended to mean by that, you really have to be aware of how it's received. And there can always be improvements in that. And for people who are first-time politicians, that's a totally new world to be thinking about, how are, thousands of people going to interpret what I'm going to say. So there's a lot of skills to be learned in that. But it was, for the debate issue, that was kind of just a case-by-case basis for each candidate.
I got told many years ago by an editor at the National Post. He'd worked for Conrad Black. The Conrad Black had 3 principles for editorial writers. That they could not oppose capitalism, they must defend Israel, and they could not support Quebec's separatism. After that, they were on their own. So he had some lines. Can you visualize lines inside the Conservative Party that would result in someone being sanctioned or thrown out of the caucus?
I do. I think that there are lines in caucus. Obviously, that's up to John now. And frankly, our vetting could definitely have been better. We opened ourselves up to a lot of criticism, but I think we're starting to see some polls coming in that are showing that candidate controversies was extremely low on voters' priority lists. People don't really care. They care about what the party's policies are. They care about what the leader's saying. They don't care so much about, what other people have said in their personal lives about whatever topic. So, candidates of ours said things that I totally disagree with and was offended by. And it's really unfortunate that some of them felt the need to post those things on public websites. But as far as kicking people out of caucus, that's up to John now and what his line will be. But we intentionally wanted to have a much higher tolerance than what other political parties have demonstrated in the past. Because in the past, I feel like there's basically no tolerance for independent thought, and to have a higher tolerance for that, I think is necessary in a properly functioning democracy. Because if we can't talk about the climate or Soji or these other things that drove a lot of people to the polls because they kind of had enough of not being able to talk about these issues that were bothering them, then you gotta accept that sometimes people are going to say things outside of those lines that you really don't like. But it shouldn't be up to three people to decide what's acceptable or not.
Well, I want to take you back to June 2023 when you became president. And it's just you and it's John Rustad at that point, and I assume a small but dedicated group of people at the core. And, this doesn't happen very often in politics where an upstart group breaks through like you did. I mean, there have been some examples. I was fortunate enough to be part of one in 1991 to start the whole BC Liberal process. But now the page is turned and the Conservatives are in the driver's seat on the free enterprise side. And it started with that small group. So I'm interested to know, what were you thinking then 18 months ago? What were you thinking about your opportunity? What were you thinking were going to be the ingredients to take it to the next step and the next step and the next step?
Yes. So, part of our small team are two executive directors, Angelo Isidoro and Connor Gibson, and two young, brilliant political minds. And and then, our goals were much different. We were thinking, 12 seats would be a huge accomplishment. We had, a couple by-elections, so we started to see some increase, even before John Cross. I think we had a by-election, I believe I think it might have been somewhere in Surrey, yeah. Mm-hmm. And so, we started to see an increase there. And then we had the by-elections in Wanda Fuca and Mount Pleasant. And so we started to see, okay, there's some messaging that's catching on, but...
it was John Horgan's riding, and Conservatives finished ahead of BC United, I believe.
Yes. So that was like, okay, things are catching on here. But it was still a bit tough for us to get like that media attention to really raise our awareness. We knew at that point there were still tons of people in this province that didn't even know we existed as a party. So it was really trying to find, focusing on getting somebody elected. And so once the opportunity arose with John, the goalposts moved. So every step, the goal line, we kind of moved it up. Once we had John, okay, we had somebody in the legislature. So a little bit more attention, still weren't an official party, but a little bit more media attention to kind of get us into the mainstream and for people to start talking to us a bit more. And, I think that gave us the opportunity for people to listen to what our ideas were and what we wanted to offer. And then with Bruce Banman crossing the floor, then we had official party status, and then we had a question period. And so, our first question was on, Soji materials, and we knew that was going to be a controversial question. And that was entirely intentional because we wanted to grab the headlines and we wanted to make some noise, even if it, freaked some people out. And we had the NDP and United standing, clapping together in the legislature. So if you needed any more evidence that there was a uniparty,
well, ironically,
they gave it to us.
But ironically, one of the people leading the standing ovation from BC United was Eleanor Sturko.
Yes.
And yet she became your fourth MLA.
Mm-hmm.
Which, politics can be crazy sometimes, in terms of how things work out.
Yes.
But by that point, to that point on Eleanor, and you had Lauren Dirksen right before Eleanor, is that there was momentum being generated last spring. And at what point did you feel like you were going to eclipse the BC United Party?
At what point did I think that that was possible? I think, I mean, you can only put so much stock into polls, although in BC they seem to be pretty accurate. Which I knew that Kevin Falcon didn't believe in the polls, but we did. And yeah, so the polling started to show us in the lead. And obviously we started having discussions with United, pretty quickly around, even when we were about tied. We started having discussions about how we could try to work this out because we knew that we didn't want, a split right. And, as the numbers started going up, for us, we were kind of like, it makes no sense for us to hand over half of the ridings. I mean, obviously that there was that one offer that they gave us that vehemently got leaked. And, when we received that offer, there was almost no point in responding from my perspective.
But there've been talks going on for months before that.
A little bit, yeah.
A little bit.
A little bit. That was I would say that was the first real, here's like an offer sheet of terms. This is, what we're looking at. And for us,
it was really inviting you to surrender, though, wasn't it?
It was. We were ahead in the polls, and they basically wanted to, chop up the province in a way that was, very beneficial for them. I think they'd end up with more seats than us. To me, it was, I negotiate for a living, and it was one of the more bizarre first offers from a party who was not in the strongest position. So it was kind of a non-starter, frankly. Yeah, there was just no way we were going to agree to that. And at that point, we felt that our messaging was stronger and resonating more. And yeah, the momentum was all with us, and theirs was all going down. So we kind of felt like that's going to keep going, and we're willing to, ride this out and see how much further we can get. And if this isn't a 2024 election, maybe it'll be the next one. But yeah, their momentum kept going down. Their fundraising numbers obviously kept going down. We kept going up, and that eventually kind of, brought us to the table again. Ideally, it would have happened earlier, because at that point we had already selected a ton of candidates. Some of our candidates had been with us for a year at that point, and I know that politics is ruthless, and sometimes you have to be ruthless, but these were candidates in our party that had been door knocking and getting donations and had come to us when we were at 5%. They saw something, they believed in the movement. And, for us to then, we're going to kick you out for like this person because their vetting was a bit cleaner. It just didn't feel right. Didn't feel like the right thing to do. And so, potentially if we had worked something out with United earlier, we could have made some more of, we would have had more spots open for more candidates. But by that point, it was so late in the day, and they had essentially no real negotiating power. So we did, I think, the best we could. And hindsight's always 2020, obviously, in a couple ridings.
Folks, I want to talk to you about energy and how we use it today in BC, whether it's heating and lighting our homes, moving people and goods, or supporting industrial growth. Energy underpins almost every aspect of our lives and economy in British Columbia. Now, to illustrate this point, we have a skill testing question for our guests here at Hotel Pacifico. The question is this: how much of the energy used in BC comes from electricity? Is it A, 99%, B, 44%, or C, 17%? Take a moment. Take your time. The answer? 17%, according to Canada's energy regulator. And where does the rest of it come from? Well, a further 30% comes from the gas system. As both an electric and gas utility, our sponsor, FortisBC, understands how both of these energy systems work together to meet our province's energy needs. And in the coming weeks, I'll be talking to you more about the steps FortisBC is taking to make sure our energy in BC remains safe, reliable, and affordable. FortisBC, energy for a better BC and a better podcast.
You got us close to a dead heat as as is possible to imagine, really. And John Rustad said, he's going to fight, which I fight for an election as soon as possible, which I take to be an appropriate thing for an opposition leader to say under any circumstances. So I wasn't as shocked by that as some were. But what do you think the near term holds? And I want to throw in another part of this, which is a comment that Angela Isidoro made, that centrism is dead. He made that in a comment to on a podcast with Mo Amir. I thought it was a fascinating comment because in a dead heat, the tendency might be to say, well, we should trim our cloth a bit here to get a bit more of that vote in the center. We might have won with that. What's the thinking, if you've had a chance to formulate it yet, on the way to proceed here? Is it to drive for that further polarization or to look for a broader tent? What do you think the debate will be like?
Such an interesting question. One we think about a lot. As far as moving more towards the middle to broaden the tent, I think we saw that with United. I think that's what they were trying to do, and look where that got them. So we're not trying to turn this party back into the BC United Party because that didn't work. It didn't resonate with anyone. Well, with not very many, 10% or so. So we're not trying to, for better or for worse, I think politics has become much more polarized. I think that I think it's Margaret Thatcher that talks about how politics isn't about consensus. It's not about consensus. It's about giving people clear choices and letting them choose between those two choices. So we're trying to provide a very different choice for people that is very clearly different from the NDP. And that's not, a little bit of what they do and a little bit of what
You're
the
making
right
good
do.
progress on that one.
Yes. So we're on track is what you're telling me. That's good. But of course we're going to be doing extensive work to find out where we could have been better. But frankly, the NDP were as ready as they will ever be for an election. They should have called this election in March, obviously, and that was a huge mistake.
There's people flinching through at NDP offices as they hear that comment.
I know. I'm sure that looking back, going, oh yeah. But I think that's pretty clear that they probably should have done that. But oh gosh, I'm losing track here. But the NDP was as ready as they'll ever be for an election. We were doubling the size of our campaign every 2 weeks in like the 6 weeks leading up to it because we had, United went away, fundraising started to go up, our team got bigger, fundraising went up, team got, we out fundraised the NDP in the third quarter. So we were growing so exponentially fast that there's so much, as far as voter ID goes, we were a brand new party. We had no historical data to go off of, and we basically tied for the popular vote. So considering we had extremely limited data and the NDP probably outperformed us on the ground game for sure, those are some like very simple things that we can focus on to make sure that we have a higher voter turnout next time. So, as far as policy goes, I think that our policies, actually, I was very proud of our policies. I think that there's so many interesting lessons with this election. I think that it's shown that the media has never mattered less. I think, mainstream media, not very many people are paying attention. And unfortunately, trust has kind of gone down in the media, in mainstream media at least. And so as much as they were talking about our candidates and it felt like candidate controversies were maybe going to kill us, polling showing it didn't really. So there's a lot of different pieces where we can learn from, but I don't know that, I think it almost is more of like the technical operations of a campaign is probably the biggest area that we can improve on. And if we were able to do this well, flying by the seat of our pants a bit, then, I'm extremely encouraged and optimistic and motivated for how well we can do in the next one, because it's so clear of where we can improve.
So the curveball for next election could be there's a party that still exists. Its name's BC United. And remains to be seen what happens to them.
It's not just resting, Mike.
It's not, apparently it's not dead. It's just resting. Yes. So it's an open question as to what's going to happen to them. And there's some serious disadvantages over at BC United headquarters. assume they owe some money. And they're not going to get any money from the taxpayer subsidy process.
Mm-hmm.
And it's going to be hard to raise money. However, they do own a potent, formerly successful brand, the BC Liberal Party. So what happens if the BC Liberal ends up on the ballot next time? Do you think that helps or hurts you?
Yeah, I don't know. Like, I don't know what's happening internally there right now. We're definitely going to want to continue with conversations with them to kind of see what they're thinking. But it's dissecting the voters in this province is interesting when you compare it to, federal people, like people's federal voting intentions, provincial. Because, there's argument that if there was, a federal Liberal type party here, maybe they would pull away from the NDP. Stronger Green Party, maybe that would pull away from the NDP.
Well, federal Liberals today certainly preferred the NDP in this past election.
Yeah.
The polling says.
Yeah. So so however it shakes out on the provincial level, it's BC, it's finicky. It hasn't done well when there's like a perceived two kind of center or center right parties. Mm-hmm. So, because it is a fairly left leaning province, although I think that is changing. It's been a bit of a realignment, I think, of voters this last election. So,
do you think you'll handle membership differently? I looked next door to Alberta. In 2015, the elevator came up for the NDP. It shocked everybody by winning a majority. Danielle Smith just got 91% approval at a convention, which is like 4,600 people came to participate in that discussion. Naheed Nenshi apparently sold 80,000 memberships to become leader of the NDP. Do you foresee your party becoming that kind of a mass party? Because I saw you doing so many rallies and other kinds of grassrootsy things. Is that a direction you want to pursue?
Yeah, we definitely want to increase our membership base. Absolutely. I was in Alberta this weekend to watch that all play out, and their politics is I don't know if it's crazier than ours, potentially. Certainly exciting, but we definitely want to grow our membership base. And there's some interesting tactics that go on in Alberta as far as, they like to eat their own a little bit and toss out their leaders every once in a while. So I know that there was a lot of anxiety around what Danielle's numbers were going to be at that. But yeah, it comes down to kind of, party governance and the leadership reviews and who's voting in those. And because they have one member, one vote, which, sounds like it's more democratic. But when you're flooding membership with, who knows who, to try to manipulate votes and whatnot, I know that that's something that can occur there that people are anxious about. So it's very interesting to watch the different governance structures across the provinces and how that plays out for each party.
The NDP here knows a little bit about sudden surges in membership from the last leadership process.
We know what happened to that leadership contender. She hasn't been heard from since.
Yeah.
So you've got this. You've got 44 MLAs. 36 are new to the legislature. You want to throw out some names of who we should be watching for? Who are you excited for showing up in the legislature? Who do you think is going to emerge? And you don't want to. I know you don't want to hurt anyone's feelings, so just give us a couple names, and then the rest of them will get their chance next time.
Yes. Well, somebody that has been a part of our group for a really long time is Harman Bangu. So really excited to see him in the House, and I think it'll be
the MLA for Langley Abbotsford, I believe.
Yes, yeah. So very proud of him, and he has the potential to be pretty entertaining, I think, too. So we'll see how he does. And then Dallas Brody, really happy to see her win.
Vancouver,
she's somebody else. Yeah, Vancouver Kilchenna, Kevin Falcon's old riding.
And she used to be the producer for the Rafe Mayer show too, I think, Geoff.
Oh yes, yeah.
Yeah,
if I'm not
some
mistaken.
time ago, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's quite a few people, but Dallas and Harmon have kind of been with the party for at least as long as I have. Dallas maybe a bit before 'cause she ran in a by-election. She ran a by-election for us, and I think got 5% of the vote or something. And now this time she won. So that's a
Yeah.
pretty cool story.
Yeah. Okay. Duly
Yeah,
noted.
yeah,
Um, well, Aisha, I said I'd get you out of here by lunchtime. So
yes.
I'd like to thank you for dropping by. We appreciate hearing the conservative perspective, and we're going to want to have more conservative guests on going forward, especially given that they're practically a majority, just three short of a majority, Geoff. Didn't you know?
Don't.
Oh
Um,
man, I know. We'll see how this judicial recount goes on Thursday. This is the election that never ends. It's
That's right.
yeah,
oof,
and
but
thanks for bringing that up. Actually, just before you leave, is
mhm.
that the you made comments last week on the integrity of the process that I think there's a lot of people who felt kind of relieved when you said that because I think out of Alberta, maybe there'd been some people saying, what's going on with that BC election? And you and John Rostad and Harman Bangu were three that I noticed that said, hey, Elections BC's got it dialed in. And then we find out yesterday that there's a ballot box missing um, in Prince George, and then some votes in Guildford that weren't counted. So how are you feeling today about it?
I know I mean, I do not envy Elections BC. I really believe that they are trying to do their best. It's very unfortunate when things like this happen because it just opens the opportunity for people to question everything. And there can obviously be some improvements in the process. You know, I know that there was lots of people talking about, oh, like ballot boxes get taken home at night, during advanced polling. That's maybe not the most secure way to do things. So we could probably improve that. We should probably be counting mail-ins as they're, being received so that we're not counting them a week after and giving, a week for people to start questioning what's going on. Because we're going to see it today with the, US election, this mirage effect, because typically like left-leaning voters mail in more than conservative voters. So if all the conservative voters vote on election day and then a week later sweet seats change because all the mail-ins and you're going to see that with the US election today, the same effect. But it's just minimizing those opportunities for questioning the integrity of the election is so important because skepticism, it has never been higher, it feels like. I still trust, as far as like the tabulators go, I trust that those are accurate. They're not connected to the internet. They're basically a calculator, and it just allows you at the end of the day, you press close poll and it prints out, what it's counted that day. And then after the hand counts where they, do an audit with one of the tabulators or so, I think nearly all of them are exactly accurate. So as far as the tabulators go, I have complete confidence in those. The vote anywhere system can be improved. But, at the end of the day, I don't think there's anything nefarious going on. But I just think that Elections BC, and I feel like they're trying to do the right thing by being transparent every step of the way. Oh, we found this. This is, what's happened. There's been some human error. And I think their statement said they hired 17,000 people to work during the election. And so human error is inevitable. It's not going to be perfect. But some improvements in that system and perhaps an independent audit after this to restore confidence, if nothing else, that, everything was done properly. And then obviously a review after to improve the system. But I still trust that we do have integrity in our elections here. It's just the process that could be improved.
Well, you have your work ahead of you this week with judicial recount.
Yes.
If Surrey Guildford is overturned, I think Geoff and I are both going to have a heart attack because we just can't take any more excitement. We're just two old guys trying to stay alive here.
Your old buddy Gary Begg, that would be stressful. Yeah.
But let's just have a final outcome for Pete's sakes. But
I know. Please end it.
But Aisha, thank you for dropping by Hotel Pacifico.
Yeah, very interesting.
Yes.
Thanks so much for coming.
And we hope to have you on again soon.
No, thank you so much for having me.
I'm Hamaz, and
And this is Simon. And we live in Surrey. We started hosting on Airbnb because we thought we had the spare room, and why not share it with people? When our guests come in, first thing usually they ask is, I'm really hungry, it's been a really long flight, can you recommend a place? Usually Simon is really good with that. He knows all the good spaces. Because we got a lot of good reviews and people commented on the overall look of the space, I was like, okay, maybe I can do this for a living. It actually gave me the courage to start school in interior design. It made such an impact on us financially, and I don't know, I think we're happier because we started Airbnb for sure.
Learn more at airbnb.com/host.
Hello. You've reached the Hotel Pacifico Strategy Suite.
Oh, we're back in the strategy suite now. It's just me and old Geoff here. Old Mike and old Geoff here today.
Yeah, an empty chair.
Geoff, are you in a hammer? May I ask, are you in a book club?
I am in a book club. I am. That's right. I am.
I would like to recommend That's Rich.
Okay.
The Rich Coleman story has hit the bookshelves, and I was gifted a autographed copy. And
Fabulous.
It's actually a biography written by Judy Tyabji about Rich Coleman.
That's right. I was reaching for the name. Yeah, another voice from the political past. But she wrote Daggers Unsheathed, if you'll recall.
Yes, and
which was about the plot against Glenn Clark.
And she wrote Political Affairs about her experience in the BC Liberal caucus with her then husband Gordon Wilson, and the Christy Clark biography too.
Oh, that's right. Okay.
So actually, no one has written more books about BC politics than Judy Tyabji in the last 20 or 30 years.
That's for sure. That's true.
Give her due.
Yeah.
And I mean, somebody's got to write them. And, Richard Zisman and Rob Shaw have famously written Matter of Confidence that is it destined for a sequel? We do not know. But
that would cost Richard Zisman his job because the CBC objected to the way he had prepared that. And it was sort of a Falcon-type moment because the CBC got furious at him, and he wound up at Global, which was probably the worst, the best thing that ever happened to him.
He is the John Rustad of the BC media, Richard Zisman.
That's right. That's right. You took the words right out of my mouth. Okay.
Yeah, there we go. So,
Aisha, Estey, lots of insights there strategically, but
just on a detail of her interview, she was talking about the leadership review process in Alberta, where it's one member, one vote. There was a day in the BC Liberal Party where Gordon Campbell had to face leadership review every year by one member, one vote. And every convention, you could show up to your delegate selection meeting and you would vote on a ballot, and it would be reported at the convention, and they got rid of it eventually because it was just like, why are we doing this to ourselves? But it's these days.
The NDP still has it. It's not.
Is it every year at convention?
No,
every convention?
No. But John Horgan went through it twice.
Okay.
And I believe the upcoming convention in 2025, which is about a year from now, there will be a review of David Eby.
Is that right? Even as a sitting premier?
Yeah. Yeah.
I think,
but it's at the convention.
Liberals,
it's not a one member, one vote thing at the convention. It's
just delegates to the convention.
Delegates to the convention, yeah.
Because I believe federal Liberals got rid of it. It's only if you lose the election, there's a review of the following convention.
Yeah, and so the first time Horgan was at 90% approval or something, and he dropped a number of points. I can't remember how many, and everyone went, ooh, that's serious. But time takes its toll.
Well, Jason Kenney,
yeah,
he got booted out by his own party while he was
Tom
premier. Ralph
Mulcair.
Klein basically got de facto booted out by his party. But yeah, Thomas Mulcair wasn't in power though, right?
Well, no, but it had a huge impact because he said, well, I was the convention repudiated him, but he didn't resign. People thought he should have, but he said
taken
no.
out by Abby Lewis and that gang.
Yeah.
Okay. So today in Strategy Suite, I've been wanting to talk about something for a couple of weeks, and frankly, I've kept forgetting about it. But on Election Day, October 19th, Civics, which runs the student vote process, released their results on Election Day. So obviously, the student vote results didn't get as much play as the actual general election. But I find the results quite fascinating. And while the 2.1 million people were voting, adults were voting, So we're 183,000 high school students across the province, which is a pretty impressive number. And that's 1,077 schools in every electoral district in British Columbia. And what was the verdict, Geoff? The verdict? Who won? Who won the government?
Very tight, but I understand it was the NDP by a nose.
The NDP won a minority government,
Yeah.
according to the high school students, which in previous student votes in 2020 and 2017, the NDP won majorities and 2013 fairly healthily, and BC Liberals were further back in the pack. The Greens, young people, the Greens do a little bit better than they normally would otherwise. But what caught my attention is that the popular vote of these 183,000 high school students was 36.7% NDP and 36.1% Conservative. I thought, my goodness, the Conservatives are doing that well with high school students compared to the NDP. And the Greens had 19%. So they cut it up to ridings as well. Like, how did the ridings fall? And 68 out of 93 ridings were the same as the actual election results. So that's pretty close right there. The Greens won 10 seats in this student poll. 9 of them were on Vancouver Island. So that makes sense too, but just shows you what the NDP are dealing with on the island. The Conservatives won some seats in interesting areas. Port Coquitlam,
But
Mayor
that's been
West.
Conservative. Yeah.
Port Coquitlam federally, but
Federally,
not, well, if you call Mike Farnworth conservative, some in the NDP might, I guess.
Well, he is conservative compared to lots of others.
Yeah, we don't know what the mayor
Small
is.
seat.
But Ladysmith Oceanside, Powell River Sunshine Coast, Surrey Guildford went conservative, if only, they're thinking. So, and then the NDP won in Abbotsford South, Langley, Walnut Grove, Maple Ridge East, and I think the NDP are like, if only the Fraser Valley had spit up a few NDP seats, that would have been nice. And Sonia Furstenau was elected in Victoria Beacon Hill. So more interesting storylines in the student vote than the actual BC election, I'd say. Richard Zusman will be happy to hear that the NDP won in Richmond Queensborough to validate his theory that so goes Queensborough, so goes the province. But anyways, what I found interesting about it, as I said a moment ago, is like, what is going on with young people? And the Conservative brand had way more resonance than the BC Liberal brand in those past student votes. But also, I mean, looking across the country today, federal Conservatives are doing better with younger people than they have in the past, and the federal Liberals are not.
Well, is that a change among young people or a change in the way that Conservatives are approaching it? What are your theories?
That is a very good question, Geoff. Which leads us to our clipping of the week. So in her online newsletter, Relay with, oh my gosh, I got to pronounce this name right, Kyla Ronellenfitch.
Yep. Good job.
Oh, I did it. I think Kyla Ronellenfitch. I think I did it. She's a pollster. And so the newsletter is called Relay with Kyla Ronellenfitch. There we go, 3 times. And she's a former guest on the Hurly Burly, our sister podcast. And she talks about how young men are going conservative and why. And she looks at data in both Canada and the US. It's worth checking out. But some of the things in her newsletter that grabbed me were, first of all, young men in particular, 18 to 34, are now much more likely to self-identify as conservatives and vote conservative. And that's similar in Canada and the US. And it's very different than young women. Young women in Canadian context are, first of all, less likely to declare a political identity, period, but much more likely relative to the young men to choose NDP. They're more likely to be federal NDP than the young men are. But one more thing about Kyla's newsletter that jumped out at me was that in the US, they looked at, well, what are the differences between young Democrats and young Republicans? And the questions are kind of interesting. Democrats are more likely to say that the problems facing young boys and young men today are that they're not learning how to express their emotions. They're becoming political extreme. They're not raised to be equal romantic partners with women, and they're being raised to be tough. That's what young Democrats are saying about young men. And whereas young Republicans are saying that gender discrimination works against boys and men, and that boys and men are being raised to be soft. So there's these underlying feelings that are, that there's such a disparity, and they tested the term toxic masculinity, and 58% of young Democrats say that conversation is helpful for society, and 69% of Republican young males are saying the conversation's harmful to boys and young men. So there's you asked the question, why is this happening? Well, part of it may be that conversation that is happening is hitting people differently at a young age.
One thing that struck me is that a lot of friends I worked with who had children in the school system were reporting that their kids were very seized by questions of gender and gender identity, and were very open to different gender identities, surprisingly, way more than it would never have happened when my kids were in school. If it did, it was very rare and noteworthy. But this is not because of the SOGI curriculum. This is, in my view, live issues that that young people are facing, and gender issues are very challenging, and the dynamics are tricky around them. I don't know if I can make any connections and connect any dots to these findings, but I think it's a big challenge for center-left parties to have a open discussion about things like SOGI with parents who are legitimately concerned, and the Conservatives have tapped into that. So you see things in Alberta like, having the parents consent to discuss gender or use of pronouns and things like that. It's fundamental to a parent to want to know what's going on with the kids at school. I mean, talk to any teacher. That's the prime directive. And so to say, well, actually, we're not going to tell you about this very, very fundamental conversation your child is having. I understand all the reasons why teachers say that, but it's not obvious to lots of people. And I think some of these things that are occurring in society are difficult and have been handled in a governmental way, with all the right reasons and thinking behind it, but people are not hearing it that way necessarily. So it's reflecting itself in a bunch of this stuff. But I keep coming back to the income stuff. Like if you raise the minimum wage, which the Horgan administration did, and then tied it to inflation and so on, you should see, people would welcome that. I think it'd be hard for an administration now to stop raising the minimum wage. I just think certain things get baked in. But right now, there's not that many economic and other tools that can be offered to people, to young people, and so they're frustrated. And the gender distinctions are not just driven by questioning about gender identity, but also by a whole set of other factors, cultural and economic ones. Very interesting to work through, but very problematic for center-left groups.
Well, I can't help but reflecting back on the interview we just had with Aisha Estey. Yeah. Here's a young person who's in the leadership role politically, who has very strong, articulate views, and you just think, well, that's not something we've seen, right? On a conservative party with that kind of leadership before, and whether that's a manifestation of what's happening with young people too. So,
well, I think on the conservative side of the spectrum too, there's been a strong effort to mentor, develop, and provide opportunity to people who are interested in conservative politics, and you see that paying big dividends these days, in my opinion.
Yeah, NDP's party of the old fogies.
So, well, not so much, but that's always a question.
Well, that's what the polling data says, Geoff.
Yeah.
Anyway, so student vote and Kyla's newsletter, check that out. It's an interesting, kind of interesting field of exploration there. Now, there's some serious cabinet making going on behind the scenes in Victoria right now, Geoff, or maybe it's happening in Vancouver. But what goes into building a cabinet anyway? What was on your mind when you were helping Mr. Horgan build a cabinet?
Well, I was trying to visualize it, because what John Horgan wound up doing was creating a very private room, which access was strictly limited, and put a picture up on the wall of every member of caucus. And and then started moving people around, not like pawns on a chessboard, but trying to align skills with needs and roles and all that kind of thing. But the starting point for many premiers was, in his case, both times I was nearby, was that he had an idea for the structure of government, and David Eby said that too, that created special roles. So in Horgan's case, there was the Ministry of Mental Health and Addictions. And later in the second term, he wanted to restructure water and land use, which led to the creation of Water, Lands, and Resource Stewardship, a brand new ministry that Public Service took the better part of a year to stand up. David Eby wanted a housing minister, even though there's no housing ministry, and he put Bowen Ma in charge of emergency services. So once the structure is clear, I mean, you can then start to try to match people to jobs. But the challenge for the current group, for Premier Eby's group, is that they're very thin on the ground in important parts of the province. And they lost a lot of veterans in very substantive files. So if we had a whole new show, we could go through a bunch of them. But just take one example. Indigenous Affairs was managed first by Scott Fraser, then by Murray Rankin. Murray did not offer up again. So that's a very important and tricky one to fill, but there's some capable people there. Not people, however, with his long background in law and that kind of thing. Nikki Sharma has a background in Indigenous law, but I think she'll probably stay at Attorney General. Just one example of the challenges facing a cabinet maker.
So Geoff, have you ever been in a fantasy football draft?
No.
Or fantasy hockey draft?
No, I'm not a drafter.
You understand the idea, though? Like,
no, I get the concept.
You get one pick, I get one pick, you get one pick, I get one pick. Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm going to give you first pick in the draft here. If
I
you were,
I won't just pick one.
well,
I got to work in this province, you know.
It's good. It's a positive conversation. But if you were David Eby and you had to pick a finance minister right now,
Right.
who would be on your short list?
3 or 4 leap to mind. Crucial job. One, of course, would be Ravi Kahlon, Senior Minister south of the Fraser. Pretty good relations with business since he worked for Jobs, Economic Development and Industry, or Innovation last time, 2 times ago. Similarly, Brenda Bailey, strong business background, entrepreneur, tech-savvy person. Adrian Dix, very senior minister, ran a huge ministry. Probably should be given a chance to try something different after 8 years of health. Mike Farnworth, another crucial asset for the government, by probably the longest serving MLA of any party, but also a veteran of House management and so on. I think among those 4, you might find the right person. Very crucial job, and important, even though the government's going to run a deficit, that they be tough and be prepared to ruffle feathers among their colleagues, because it's going to be a year when they can't do many things that people would like to do.
Well, I think on that list, I'd have my eye on Brenda Bailey, in part because, and you know the politics better than I would within the NDP, but when you have your caucus 2/3 women and the premier's a
Absolutely.
male,
No.
I think a female finance minister is a little more important this time, even though there have been, Carol James and Selena Robinson and
Well, I think
Katrine
that's
Conroy.
that's true, and I think it's critical the person have some knowledge and understanding of the business community.
Yeah. So okay, so there's your finance topic. Now, healthcare. I'm gonna go first here, and
Yep.
I'm gonna suggest that, I think we talked about it last week. Adrian Dix, or we talked about it on Focus BC the other day. Adrian Dix is due for a change for his own sake, but also for the government's sake. I think they need it's time for a fresh voice there. And he's been the longest serving health minister, I think, in a long time, if ever.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if there was a SOCRED back in the day that was longer, but maybe not. But
Well,
it's a
Terry
tough
Lake
one.
was quite a long time, but yeah, he's not as long as Adrian.
No more than 4 years. Yeah,
That's right.
So in this case, you want a minister that is you've got control of 50% of the expenditures of government are around there, right? And it's just massive, and it's the problems are immense, and the cost pressures are unsustainable.
The interest groups, stakeholders. Yeah.
So I'm thinking, okay, well, you need an experienced hand here who can really, have a lot of clout with the bureaucracy, and that's where I'd be inclined to go with a veteran here. And I would probably default to a Mike Farnworth, who's been around a long time and understands the pressures. The only caveat I have on that is I think Farnworth may have some cachet in an economic portfolio as well, where the business community might feel some affinity to him like a ministry like energy, for instance. But
Hmm.
so failing Mike Farnworth, the other person I would throw on the table is someone like Bowen Ma, who's been in the legislature for a while, and who's never had a senior portfolio before, and this might be the test, right? It's like, here you go, Bowen. Here's your here here's
Yeah,
50% of the
she
expenditures.
was on my list too. Very
Yeah.
capable person, and I have make the same comments. The some other names that have done health that one that can't really is Jennifer Whiteside, who ran the Hospital Employees Union. So it'd be a bit of a challenge for her then to go in and run the health ministry, having had that history. It'd be easier probably to use someone with that experience in another senior portfolio. Josie Osborne, possibly, but Josie Osborne wound up in energy. There's some really tough. Well, there's no easy cabinet jobs. Some are easier than others. And Josie Osborne's one of those people who did the energy file, has a strong environment background. Both those are going to be tricky for an EB administration, I think. So challenging to fill. Anyway,
So let's deal Mike Farnworth out of public safety and
yeah.
just assume that he's got the bumps and bruises from Surrey in the past couple of years, and he may need a change of scenery as well. Who do you see? And this is the taking on the crime issue principally. I mean, the AG has something to do with it too, but here's the face of the NDP's response to dealing with crime, a huge
Well,
issue in the
I
election, and
just said Jennifer
conservatives.
Whiteside might be too close to the HU to do health, but I'm not feeling the same way about Gary Begg, for example, to do Solicitor General. There's a
Mhm.
separate deputy there who's responsible for directing the police, but bringing someone with an RCMP background and from Surrey who, frankly, got the government over the line and into power is not a bad idea. It's hard for me to imagine a new cabinet without Gary Begg in it, given the very small number of people that they have in Surrey and only a couple with experience. He's one of them. Not cabinet experience, however.
Mhm.
The other senior person south of Fraser is Ravi Kahlon, not for Solicitor General, but he was both House Leader and Housing Ministry, and I'll be fascinated to see what role he's offered and whether he
I've got
has
a
to
job for
continue
him
as
coming
House
up
Leader.
next.
Okay, good.
Um,
Go for it.
but on public safety, one person I've got my eye on, he's a rookie, but I wonder about Terry Young.
Terry Young
Yeah.
or Paul Choi, who was a Crown prosecutor from Burnaby. So the two of them
Oh, really?
are equal
Interesting.
status. Yeah, both offer something to the job.
Yeah. Terry Young, obviously a cop, and from Vancouver, would be pretty high profile for him. Would be a fresh look.
Hmm.
Okay, so we'll see where that goes. So I have a job for Ravi Kahlon,
Okay.
and that could be potentially Minister of Forests. And
Whoa.
because I think he set the table on the housing stuff, and that can be passed along to somebody else. But forestry is going to be a big issue for the NDP. They have very little
Yes.
depth in caucus on forestry. I do note that the MLA who scraped in Juan de Fuca, Dana Lejeunesse, I believe,
La
Lejeunesse,
Jeunesse, yeah.
Lejeunesse. Uh, he's got a little bit of forestry background, or multi-generational anyway, so he's probably more than a little. Um, but Ravi, I believe he had a
He worked on
parliamentary
mass timber
secretary
and stuff
role.
first,
Yeah,
yeah, exactly. Yeah,
yeah,
he knows quite a
and
bit about it.
strong South Asian involvement in the industry historically, throughout the province. So I could see that,
Hmm.
and I think that's a big portfolio. I don't think
Oh,
it's
it's huge.
it's not a
Yeah, it's
demotion.
no, but a tough job. But he's up to tough jobs. He's done that before.
Do you have any other forest ministers in your back
I
pocket?
racked my brain on that one. My list here is pretty short. I wondered about Adrian Dix on that. It is very complicated and in a senior role.
Yeah.
He's got a lot of experience and knows quite a bit about it. Not a huge background of his, but he's certainly knowledgeable about most things. So,
Any other sleeper names we should be looking at for cabinet in general, Jeff?
well, um, we talked about Bowen. I look at Jagrup Brar, elected something like 7 times. He was a minister of state. There were 2 or 3
Hmm.
ministers of state in the last cabinet. I suspect that'll go away. What do you do to bolster that Surrey representation? To group is a name that I don't think you can walk by very easily. Two really solid performers in the returning group are Lisa Bear, who was citizen services and then stepped into post-secondary, and Anne Kang, who is consistently underrated. She's done post-secondary and a bunch of other things. Anne Kang is sort of a all-around player who could go almost anywhere. Jennifer Whiteside's very strong and did education, then was sent into mental health. The question, I think, for Premier Eby is how does he reflect the priority he put on mental health and addiction? It's always difficult to, it's kind of the tail that wags the dog in health funding. Will he keep an emergency services role, which is what he had with Bowen Ma? And, I suspect, as you point out, Bowen's destined for a larger portfolio. She did a good job at that. But neither housing, which Ravi Kahlon had, or emergency services are ministries. They were more or less agencies. And, you don't get a lot of power that way. People would like to have ministries. Lana Popham, another very solid front bencher, but she's done lots of agriculture. She's really great at retail politics. She's very good with stakeholders and demonstrated that during the floods in the Fraser Valley. So thinking about that.
Well, I think regionally, I'm expecting to see at least 2 ministers from the interior. There's only 4 MLAs from the interior. Tamara Davison's the only one north of Vernon elected from North
I
Coast.
could see her even being in Indigenous affairs, given the depth of her experience. A tough job, but still.
Well, it'll be interesting as a Haida member with the Haida agreement behind her, what that would mean, That would be an interesting, someone with interesting insights.
Well, we're not going to do new legislation there. They're not going to do the Land Act again, which was not that ministry. But another name in the among the Indigenous group of new MLAs is Deborah Toporowski in Cowichan, who was like 5 times elected to her own First Nation council and twice to city council. Probably would be very well suited for a number of jobs, but municipal affairs would be something that she might do very well at. I don't know her, but she's got a great resume. I think Nikki Sharma will probably stay where she is, but
Harwinder Sandhu from Vernon, Lumbee, she's survived a tough race up there. She got a little bit of luck as well, but as a 2-term MLA, I wonder about her or Brittany Anderson from Nelson.
Yeah, I had Brittany down.
So there you go.
The island is well represented, but Nina Krieger is an excellent candidate. She ran the Holocaust Memorial Center for many years, so that would be a very important signal to the Jewish community, which was furious about the handling of the Selena Robinson affair. So, there are people there, but some of these are tough assignments.
Well, my advice to Premier Eby, which guarantees won't happen, is that I would, you just touched on a minute ago, I would do away with ministers of state. I would try to construct a cabinet of line ministers. Christie did that in her first cabinet in 2011. I think it was helpful as a baseline to start from there and then maybe add ministers of state when you absolutely have to later. But I think it just brings a little more focus. And frankly, I would go smaller than bigger this time. 27 is too much in a 49 or 47 member caucus. So,
well, the other problem is to pare down the legislative agenda, which is not going to come in a throne speech or anything in the near term. But if you know what you're putting in the mandate letters, then it's easier in some respects to pick folks. If you're saying to someone, we want you to stay out of trouble and keep this particular part of our ship on a stable course, that's one set of messages. But this has been a very reformist, aggressive government on the legislative front, and it'll be interesting to see what they take from the platform and put in there, and then who they put to lead those particular challenges. I mean, I look at housing as one, but the whole addictions opioid crisis, you've touched on Solicitor General, the policing side, involuntary care. Like these are wicked problems, as they say, and they're going to require a lot of cross-government engagement.
Conservatives, anyone you have an eye on to be the House Leader or the kind of 2IC for Rustad?
Well, I'm fascinated to see where the BC United survivors who paddled to shore or paddled to safety on the Conservative ship where they sit in the thing, because really, I didn't do the math, but the number of people who've been in cabinet before is like 7 or something, isn't it?
In cabinet? No, only 2.
No. Only
John
two.
Rustad and Teresa Watt. Yeah,
That's
The
right.
eight members of the legislature. Well, 8 have experience in the legislature.
Yeah.
36 are brand new. I mean, I kind of think Peter Millibar would be, on an experience basis, would be a strong pick for House Leader. So it'll be an interesting thing is whether John Rustad's going to go for experience or whether he's going to say, no, I'm going with an original gangster conservative. Now, Aisha raised in the interview a couple of people that stood out as kind of being original conservatives, Harman Bangu from Langley Abbotsford. So, maybe he ends up in something like whip, or maybe he's elected as caucus chair. That's a name to watch. So we'll see. Well, the cabinet will come first, and then the all-important critic assignments that we all wait for bated breaths on will be announced shortly thereafter.
Well, I think it'll be fascinating to see, too. And Aisha's comment about the first question they selected being on Soji, very purposely designed to differentiate the Conservatives from the other two parties. We can look for some really strategic planning from the Conservative side, I think, when the House does come back, which probably won't be in any serious way till February. But at that point, it'll be game on. And I worked for the Glenn Clark administration where we had a majority of 3, and it was nail-biting time the whole time. Because someone could get ill, like Ed Conroy at that time was one of our MLAs. He needed a liver transplant and simply could not come. And then very quickly you're down to a dead heat. So it's not stable.
I believe you did recruit Jack Weisgerber as speaker until he shot a decoy and got charged as on hunting charges, and he couldn't. He was too honorable to take the speakership on that basis.
Right.
So,
that's right.
anyways, just a little fun fact for you listeners new to BC
I might have made a
politics.
mistake saying that Glenn Clark got into trouble trying to find a speaker in the writer, David, now his name escapes me. David Mitchell. It was actually Conflict of Interest Commissioner. And in those days, it wasn't selected by a legislative committee. And David Mitchell became controversial because the name of the fact that he was being considered leaked out. And
BC Liberals weren't too happy about that. Yeah.
They went crazy. Yeah. So much for that career.
Well, so much memory lane. So, Geoff, let's head over to the minibar.
Let's raise a glass or take a shot. Time to raid the minibar.
I'll go first. I'm going to raise a glass to David Taboul, Assistant Commissioner of the RCMP, who announced a staggering bust of a super lab on Thursday, which was great work by a very large RCMP team, but very sobering. I think it was 89 firearms seized, including a 50 caliber machine gun and enough doses of fentanyl to kill every Canadian twice over. So it bears some thinking and contemplation, but really excellent work by the RCMP. It won't stop the overdose crisis, but it does send a warning that we're not helpless in the face of some of those criminals. So good work to them.
And Geoff, you wrote a good piece on your blog on this, Lotus Land.
Lotus Land, geoffmeggs.substack.com. Yes, thank you for that.
There you go.
But it's a fascinating topic and one that the government should spend more time on, in my opinion.
There you go. I will raise a glass this week to Shannon Salter, the head of public service.
Yeah.
Because as Premier Eby decides on the structure of government and the cabinet choices, Shannon has to decide on the deputies. Because I believe it's still the case where the head of the public service is still directing who the deputies are. It's not the cabinet ministers that choose their own deputies. It's not the premier that chooses the deputies, although I'm sure he'll have some influence on it. It is the head of the public service. And the team that the head of the public service puts in place is very impactful to how things get executed and implemented. So I'm wishing Shannon the best in her process over the next couple of weeks, because it will mean a lot to a lot of stakeholders as to who's going to be directing traffic.
And I think she's already had to wave goodbye to Stephen Brown, who was the deputy of health for something like 11 years. So that's a big hole to fill by itself.
Yeah. And there will be more. Life goes on, people retire, constant recruiting that goes on. So anyways, thinking about the public service while all this politics is going on. Anyways, I'd like to thank all of our guests for stopping by Hotel Pacifico this week. Thank you to our presenting sponsor, TELUS, to Fortis BC and Airbnb for supporting our little podcast here. We'll see you next week. BC, you can never leave.
checkout time at Hotel Pacifico. We hope you enjoyed your stay.